They say housewarmings are for family, to thank those who made it all possible. But when I arrived, uninvited, at the Cotswold Stone Manor my daughter bought with a £950,000 loan in my name, she looked me up and down and asked how on earth I'd got there. Her guests, all champagne flutes and smug smiles, tittered. She didn't stop them. I just smiled, stepped aside, and nodded to the court bailiff. The string quartet didn't even make it to the first chorus before the silence fell. She thought I wouldn't show up. She had no idea I was bringing consequences with me. The phone rang at precisely 10:42 on a Tuesday morning. I know this because I just glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall, counting the minutes until my favorite gardening program started. At 62, one appreciates the small routines that give a day its structure. My morning Earl Grey, the local news on the radio, then an hour in my rose garden before the unpredictable British sun decided to either scorch or abandon us. The voice on the other end was professional, cool, and utterly devoid of warmth. It belonged to a Jennifer Davies from the fraud department at Albion Financial. She needed to speak with me about a delinquent account. I straightened in my kitchen chair, my half-full teacup hovering mid-air. In my 40 years as a chartered accountant, I developed a sixth sense for financial trouble, a sort of tremor in the force, and this sounded like a seismic event. I told her there must be some mistake, keeping my voice as level as a balance sheet. I had no delinquent accounts with them. In fact, I didn't bank with Albion Financial at all. She paused, and I could hear the faint click of a keyboard. According to her records, she said, I held a mortgage for £950,000, which was currently 3 months in arrears. The property was located at 12 Kingfisher Lane, Chipping Campden. Could I confirm if I had applied for this loan? The number hit me like a physical blow, winding me. It was more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. My little terraced house in Cirencester, the one I'd bought for £89,000 25 years ago, was long since paid off. I told her it was impossible, even as my accountant's brain was already whirring, searching for explanations, for clerical errors. I had never applied for such a loan. It must be a case of identity theft. I could almost hear her nodding patiently on the other end of the line. She understood my confusion, she said, but she had all my information right there on her screen. My national insurance number, my date of birth, my previous addresses. She asked if I could come to their offices in Cheltenham that afternoon to review the paperwork. After I hung up, I sat in my sun-drenched kitchen for a long time, staring at the neat pile of paid bills on my small oak desk. 30 years of a carefully planned retirement, living on my pension and modest savings. Never wealthy, but always responsible. It was how my mother had raised me, and how I had tried, and evidently failed, to raise Celeste. Celeste, my 34-year-old daughter, whom I hadn't seen in 8 months. Our last conversation had ended with her screaming that I was selfish for not sharing my wealth, when she and her husband, Trevor, needed help with a deposit for a house. I had explained, patiently, that I had no wealth to share, only enough to see me through my remaining days with dignity and a decent supply of biscuits. That explanation had not been enough for her. By 1 o'clock, I was sitting opposite Jennifer Davies, a woman whose crisp white blouse and sharp suit probably cost more than my weekly shop. She slid a thick folder across the polished desk. It contained my supposed alternative financial life. My signature was splashed across documents I'd never seen, attesting to an income I'd never earned. According to these papers, I was the owner of a thriving consultancy firm generating £200,000 annually. I'd have certainly noticed that kind of income, I thought wryly. My council tax band alone would have given me a heart attack. She asked if I recognized the signature, pointing to the bottom of the mortgage application. I put on my reading glasses, the expensive ones I reserved for the fine print of tax law, and studied the ink. For 4 decades, I'd scrutinized documents, hunting for inconsistencies, for the tiny tells of a lie. This signature was good, very good, but it wasn't mine. The cross of the T in Hargrave was a fraction too high, and the loop on my Y in Yvonne was fuller, more flamboyant than my own neat, contained script. I told her with absolute certainty that it was a skillful forgery, but it wasn't me. She nodded, making a note. Did I have any idea who might have done this? Someone with access to my personal information? The question hung in the air between us, but I already knew the answer. There was only one person who had all my personal details, who had seen my signature thousands of times on birthday cards and graduation checks. One person who knew my NI number because I'd given it to her myself when I helped her fill out her first job application. But I wasn't going to say her name. Not yet. I told Ms. Davies I needed a copy of every single document and the full address of the property. That afternoon, I drove my reliable Honda Civic into the heart of the Cotswolds. Kingfisher Lane turned out to be a spectacular modern house built from honey-colored stone, perched on a hill with a view that swept across the rolling green countryside. It had professionally landscaped gardens, a sleek black BMW, and a silver Tesla parked on the gravel drive. It was exactly the kind of house Celeste had plastered all over her Pinterest boards since she'd married Trevor 5 years ago. I parked across the road, watching. At 4:30, the heavy oak front door opened and my granddaughter, Nicola, emerged, her school blazer slung over one shoulder, headphones clamped over her ears. At 16, she was tall and slim like her mother, but she had my dark, watchful eyes and my tendency to observe before speaking. She saw my car and froze. I wound down the window and gave a small wave. After a nervous glance back at the house, she hurried across the road. "Gran?" she whispered, her voice tight with surprise. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, my love. Is this your new home?" Nikki nodded, but there was an uncomfortable, shifty quality to her expression. Mum said they could finally afford it, that Dad closed a huge deal. They moved in 3 months ago, she explained, right after. She stopped, biting her lip. Right after Mum said we couldn't see you anymore. She says you're toxic and you don't support her dreams. My granddaughter's words hurt, a dull ache behind my ribs, but they didn't surprise me. Celeste had always been an expert at rewriting history to suit her own narrative. I asked Nikki gently if she believed that about me. She shook her head quickly, her ponytail swishing. "Never. But Mum says if I see you, I won't be able to go on the school trip to Italy, and she's already paid the deposit." With money that wasn't hers, I thought, but didn't say it. Instead, I pulled a piece of paper from my handbag. I needed her to look at something and tell me if she'd ever seen her mother sign her name like this. It was the copy of the mortgage application. Nikki studied the signature with the same intense concentration she'd inherited from me. She was a sharp girl, this one. She noted that it looked a bit like her mum's signature when she was in a hurry, but it wasn't like mine at all. My signature, she said, was more careful. Clever girl. I took the paper back, my resolve hardening. I told her that no matter what happened in the next few weeks, I loved her, and none of what was coming was her fault. Her eyes welled with tears. She asked if something bad was going to happen. I told her something true was going to happen, and sometimes the truth feels bad at first, but it is always better than a lie. That night, I called Rosalind Bennett, my best friend of 20 years. Roz had been my emotional life raft since my husband David's death, and the only person I trusted implicitly. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. She told me I sounded terrible and asked what had happened. I relayed the entire sordid tale as she, on her end, poured what I knew would be a very large gin and tonic. Roz ran her own successful tax advisory firm from a chic converted barn just outside of town, so she understood both the legal and emotional architecture of the disaster I was describing. She listened without interruption, a skill that made her an excellent accountant and an even better friend. When I finished, there was a long pause, punctuated only by the clink of ice in her glass. She declared that my daughter had always been a master manipulator, a statement delivered with the blunt force of a tax audit. Even as a little girl, she'd always found a way to get what she wanted, no matter who was left in the wreckage. I started to protest, the old maternal instinct kicking in, but she cut me off. She reminded me that I was Celeste's mother, not her personal bank or her get-out-of-jail-free card. Then came the crucial question. What was I going to do about it? I sat in silence, stirring a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. My entire life had been spent avoiding conflict. I had yielded to keep the peace. When Celeste was a teenager and screamed at me, I was the one who calmed down and sought compromise. When she came home at 25, needing money for a down payment on a flashy car, I liquidated some of my modest investments. When she married Trevor and demanded a £30,000 wedding that was more of a theatrical production than a ceremony, I had remortgaged my own home to help. But this was different. This wasn't asking for money. This was stealing my identity. This was jeopardizing the roof over my head, the very foundation of the life I had painstakingly built. This was gambling with my future without so much as asking. I am going to do, I said, my voice finding a firmness I hadn't heard in years, what I should have done a long time ago. I am finally going to treat her as I would any stranger who had stolen my identity. Roz let out a low whistle of approval. There's my friend, she said. Where do we start? For the next 3 hours, we laid a plan. Roz had a black book of contacts in the legal and financial worlds. I had my forensic accounting skills and, more importantly, a lifetime of meticulous documentation. If Celeste wanted to play with numbers, she had picked the wrong opponent. That night, alone in my quiet house, I sat at my desk and opened a new ledger. On the cover, in my neatest script, I wrote, Fraud Investigation, C. Wilson. Then I began the first page of what would become the most important case of my life. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something more fundamental. It was about reclaiming my name, my credit, my future. It was about teaching my daughter that actions have consequences. A lesson she had clearly failed to learn in her 34 years. But most of all, it was for Nikki. It was about making sure she saw that the women in our family did not have to be victims. We could be strong without being cruel, decisive without being destructive. As I wrote, I could hear the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the same sound that had marked my mornings for years. But something had changed. I was no longer just Yvonne Hargrave, the quiet retiree living on her pension. I was now Yvonne Hargrave, the woman who had been underestimated for far too long. And tomorrow I would begin to show them what I was really made of. The clock continued to tick away the seconds as I finished the first page of my documentation. It was 11:30 at night, but sleep felt a world away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the forged signature, the grand house on Kingfisher Lane, the troubled expression on Nikki's face. But more than anything, I saw years of small manipulations that I had ignored, excused, or simply tolerated for the sake of a quiet life. No more. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I called Roz. Good morning, Avenger, she said with a laugh in her voice. Did you get any sleep? 3 hours, I replied, but I have a list of what we need. Do you know a good fraud investigator? Better than that, she said. I know Andrew Collins. He was a forensic auditor for years before going private, specializing in financial crimes against individuals. He's good, and even better, he's honest. I asked if she could call him. She told me she already had, and he could see me that afternoon at 2. That was my Roz, always a step ahead, always ready for action while I was still processing the situation. It was what had made our friendship work for 2 decades. She pushed me forward when my natural tendency was to retreat and analyze. I spent the morning preparing as if I were going to the most important business meeting of my life. In a way, I gathered every document I had, tax returns from the last 5 years, bank statements, my employment history, even the old Christmas cards I'd signed for Celeste over the years. If Andrew Collins was going to help me, he would need to see the stark difference between my real financial life and the fiction they had created. His office was in a modest, unassuming building in Cheltenham, tucked between a dental surgery and an estate agent. It wasn't what I'd expected, but Roz had insisted I not be fooled by appearances. Andrew Collins himself turned out to be a man in his late 40s with prematurely silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. As I explained the situation, he showed no surprise, just took meticulous notes and asked precise questions. He asked if my daughter had physical access to documents bearing my signature. For years, I explained, I'd helped her with job applications, apartment references, school paperwork when Nikki was small. I always signed things when she asked. And my personal information, my NI number, my date of birth? I gave them to her when she needed me as a reference, I said, my voice fading. I never thought my own daughter would weaponize that trust against me. Andrew opened the folder I'd brought from the bank. He told me to look at the documents again, but this time not to focus on the signature. He wanted me to look at the dates. I studied the papers. The loan application was dated the 15th of March. According to the documents, I had gone in person to the Albion Financial Office in Bristol that day to sign all the paperwork. The 15th of March, I murmured. And then I remembered. The 15th of March was the day of Nicky's spring concert. I was there all afternoon. I asked if he could prove it. I had photos and the program from the recital. I rummaged in my handbag until I found my small leather-bound diary. There it was. Nicky's concert, 2 p.m., St. Mary's Auditorium. Andrew smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. That, he said, is your alibi, Mrs. Hargrave. Bristol was an hour and a half away. You couldn't have been in both places. It was a good start, he continued, but we would need more. We needed a professional handwriting analysis of the forged signature. We needed statements from people who could confirm where I was that day. And we needed documentation of my real financial situation to prove I could never have qualified for a loan of that magnitude. For the next 2 hours, Andrew explained the legal process. It was complex, but not impossible. The most important thing was that I had options. I could file a report for identity fraud, seek a court order to freeze the property, and work with the bank to reverse the transaction. But he warned me that once we started this process, there was no turning back. My daughter would face criminal charges. Her husband, too, if he was complicit. He looked at me, his sharp eyes softening for a moment, and asked if I was sure I wanted to go ahead. The question hit me harder than I'd expected. For 34 years, I had protected Celeste from the consequences of her actions. When she'd crashed the car at 17, I'd paid for the repairs and didn't report it to the insurance. When she was fired from her first job for taking money from the till, I helped her find another without revealing the reason for her dismissal. When she divorced her first husband and needed money for a solicitor, I liquidated my shares. But this was different. This wasn't protecting my daughter. This was enabling her to destroy me. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I'm sure. That evening, Roz drove me to see Patricia Evans, a solicitor specializing in financial fraud who had helped several of her clients in the past. Patricia was a petite woman with an enormous presence and a reputation for not taking on a case unless she was certain she could win. Her office, in a smart Georgian townhouse in Bath, was lined with leather-bound legal books and modern art. It smelled of old paper and new money. She reviewed my documents, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her questions precise and probing. Your case is solid, she said finally, steepling her fingers. But it's going to be painful. The media might take an interest, especially with a property as high-profile as the one you've described. Are you prepared for that? I admitted I wasn't, but I was prepared for what would happen if I did nothing. Patricia smiled, a quick, predatory flash of white teeth. Good answer, she said. We'll start with a civil claim to reverse the transaction. Simultaneously, we'll apply for a court order to freeze the asset and prevent them from selling or refinancing it. When do you want us to begin? I looked at her, then at Roz, who gave me a firm nod. Right now, I said. Over the next few days, I became a documentation machine. I called my old firm to get official letters confirming my retirement date and final salary. I contacted my bank for 5 years of transaction history. I dug out my old tax files and made copies of everything that could prove my true financial standing. Roz helped me organize a side-by-side comparison of my real signature with the forgery. We took samples from birthday cards, old checks, legal documents. The difference was subtle but consistent. Whoever had faked my signature had done a good job, but not a perfect one. The pressure of my pen was different, the flow less assured. On Friday afternoon, a week after the phone call that had turned my world upside down, I received confirmation that Patricia had filed all the legal papers. The court order would be issued on Monday, effectively freezing the property on Kingfisher Lane. I asked Andrew what happened next. Now, he said over the phone, we wait. Your daughter will receive a legal notification within 48 hours. She will probably try to contact you. He was right. On Saturday evening, as I was watching a historical drama with a cup of tea, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my hand tremble. Celeste. I let it ring. It rang again. And again. Finally, I decided to answer. I heard her voice, sharp and laced with the familiar edge of teenage petulance. Mom? What the hell is going on? I just got a letter from some solicitor saying there's a court order on my house. What does this have to do with you? It's my house, Celeste, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. At least, according to the bank. You used my name to buy it. There was a long silence, then a spluttered denial. I don't know what you're talking about. I told her she did, and now she was going to have to explain it to a judge. Her tone shifted immediately. Mom, please can't we just sort this out between us? We don't need to get solicitors involved. There it was, the manipulation I knew so well. The soft, almost girlish voice she'd used to convince me to give her money for the car, for the wedding, for anything she wanted. I told her we couldn't sort it out between us anymore. She had ruined that possibility when she decided to steal my identity. Her response was chilling in its casualness. I didn't steal anything, she said, her voice hardening again. I just used your information. I thought you wouldn't mind. You never use your credit anyway. The coldness of that statement cut through me. She hadn't just forged my signature. She had completely rationalized her right to do so. I told her it wasn't about whether I minded. She had put my entire financial future at risk without so much as a thought. What would have happened if they couldn't make the payments? Did she know they could have taken my home? She scoffed. That would never have happened. Trevor earns good money. Apparently not enough to qualify for his own loan. I shot back. There was another silence. Then her voice changed again, becoming vicious. You were always selfish. Dad used to say you were too tight-fisted to be generous, even with your own family. The mention of my late husband hit me like a slap. David had died when Celeste was 8. What she remembered of him were stories I had told her, memories I had chosen to share. That she would now twist them into a weapon against me was a cruelty I hadn't expected, even from her. I told her that her father had never said that, and she knew it. Whatever, she snapped. Look, we can fix this. We can put the house in my name officially. You don't need it. I told her it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about what she did to get it. Oh my God. Mom, it's just paperwork. It's not like I physically hurt you. And there it was. The total lack of understanding, of empathy, of any recognition that she had done something wrong. In her mind, I was the irrational one for being upset. I said goodbye. She started to protest, telling me not to hang up, but I did. I turned off the phone and sat in my silent kitchen, trembling, not from fear, but from something akin to relief. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I had said no to my daughter. I had held a line. Roz was right. This wasn't cruelty. It was survival. On Monday morning, Andrew called with news. The court order was active. The property was officially frozen. My daughter could not sell, refinance, or transfer the property until the case was resolved. I asked how long that would take. It depended, he said, on whether she wanted to settle or go to trial. But then he added something else. His source in the sheriff's department had mentioned that my daughter was planning a party at the house that weekend. A big housewarming party. Of course she was. Celeste had always believed that appearance was more important than reality. She had probably already sent the invitations, hired the caterers, planned a whole performance of her new, successful life. I asked what he recommended. Legally, he said, we have several options. We could have the sheriff shut the party down, since she is technically using a frozen asset. Or we could use the party as an opportunity. If she's going to present her new life of luxury to her friends, perhaps it's time to present the truth as well. The idea was audacious, risky, and perfectly fitting. Celeste had stolen my identity to impress her friends. It was only right that they should discover the truth in the same grand fashion. Do it, I said. But I want to be there when it happens. Andrew chuckled. I thought you might say that. Are you sure you can handle it? Andrew, I said, I spent 40 years auditing company books, looking for discrepancies and errors. This is just another audit. The only difference is, this time, I'm the one presenting the findings. That night, I chose my outfit for the party. A simple, conservative gray suit I had worn for important presentations during my career. I wasn't going to that party to impress anyone. I was going to reclaim what was mine. My name, my reputation, and my dignity. Celeste had bet that I would never have the courage to confront her publicly. She had been wrong about a lot of things lately. This would be just one more. The days leading up to the party felt like the eerie calm before a storm of my own making. As I waited for the final legal details to be confirmed, I couldn't help but wonder what Celeste was thinking. Did she genuinely believe she could proceed with her celebration as if nothing had happened? Or was she plotting some clever strategy to wriggle out of this mess without admitting any fault? The answer arrived on Wednesday morning when Roz appeared at my door, her expression a mixture of amusement and outrage. "You have to see this," she said, waving her phone. "Your daughter just posted this on Instagram." The image showed an elegant, cream-colored invitation with gold lettering. "Celeste and Trevor Wilson cordially invite you to celebrate their new home." It read, the Kingfisher Lane address clearly visible. Saturday, October 23rd, 7 p.m. Black tie and cocktails. Let's celebrate our achievements and new beginnings. New beginnings, I muttered. Achievements. Wait. There's more, Roz said, swiping her finger across the screen. Look at the comments. There were dozens of them. Friends congratulating her on finally getting her dream house. Trevor's colleagues from the estate agency expressing their admiration for the incredible property. Even a few local lifestyle bloggers commenting on the premium location. Look at this one, Roz said, pointing to a particular comment. Knew you two would make it. Trevor always said he came from a family with money. How lucky that Celeste's family could help out. I felt my stomach clench. They hadn't just used my identity to get the house. They had constructed an entire narrative around me, helping them willingly. In the minds of their friends, I was the generous mother who had made their Cotswold dream a reality. Roz, this is worse than I thought, I said. They're not just stealing from me. They're making it look like I'm a willing accomplice. Which makes your appearance at the party even more perfect, Roz said with a fierce grin. They're going to have to explain why the generous mother arrived with court officers. Andrew called that afternoon with the final news I'd been waiting for. Everything is in place, Mrs. Hargrave. I have the updated court order, an assigned court bailiff, and the complete fraud documentation. Patricia says we have one of the strongest cases she's ever seen. I asked what exactly would happen on Saturday. We'll arrive at 7:30, he explained, after the party has started but before it's in full swing. The bailiff will read the court order freezing the property and notify everyone present that the house is under investigation for fraud. Afterwards, you will have the opportunity to present the facts. And if Celeste tries to stop him, she can't. Once a court order is being read, interfering is contempt of court. But, Mrs. Hargrave, are you absolutely sure you want to do this publicly? Once this is out there, you can't take it back. I was silent for a moment, thinking of Nikki, of Celeste's friends who had commented so innocently on Instagram, of everyone who had believed the lie. Andrew, I said, for years I have avoided confrontation to keep the peace. But the peace I kept was a false one, built on allowing my daughter to lie and manipulate without consequence. If I'm going to shatter that false peace, I might as well do it in a way that everyone understands exactly what's happening. Understood, he said. We'll see you on Saturday at 7:30. On Friday, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. Visit the house. Not to confront anyone, but to see with my own eyes what they had built on my name. I drove to Kingfisher Lane in the afternoon, when I knew Celeste and Trevor would be at work and Nikki at school. The house looked even more impressive than the first time. They had added exterior decorations, professional lighting in the gardens, even a new water feature in the circular drive. I parked across the road and walked towards the property. The front door had an electronic lock, but there was a small side window without curtains that allowed me to peer inside. The interior was exactly what I would have expected from Celeste. All white and gold, furniture that probably cost more than my car, modern art on the walls. It was beautiful, certainly, but also cold. There were no family photos visible, nothing personal, nothing to suggest a family actually lived there. Can I help you, miss? I turned, startled. An older man in gardening overalls was looking at me with curiosity, but no hostility. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I was just admiring the house. It's very beautiful." That it is. The new owners spent a fortune on it. Good people, though the missus can be a bit particular. Have you known them long? I've been tending this garden for 3 years, since before they arrived. Mr. Wilson is polite enough. The missus, well, she always has opinions on how things should look. And their daughter, Nikki, that one's a treasure. Often brings me out a lemonade when it's hot. Reminds me of my own granddaughter. Sharp as a tack, that one. I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. Nikki had inherited more from me than Celeste would probably ever want to admit. "Forgive me for asking," the gardener said, "but are you family?" Nikki mentioned she has a grandmother she doesn't see much, and you have the same eyes. "I am her grandmother," I admitted. "Yvonne Hargrave." "Ah." His face lit up. "Nikki talks about you all the time. Says you taught her how to budget and that you always smell of vanilla biscuits." The words touched my heart. In the midst of all this betrayal and pain, Nikki still remembered me with affection. "Do you know if she'll be at the party tomorrow?" I asked. "Oh yes, the big celebration." Nikki didn't seem too thrilled about it, to be honest. Said she'd rather be with you, baking biscuits, than with all her mother's fake friends. Clever girl indeed, my granddaughter. That night, after dinner, I sat in front of my bedroom mirror, preparing my appearance for the next day. This wasn't about vanity. It was about presentation. When I appeared at that party, I wanted everyone to know immediately that I was not a guest. I was the rightful owner, the wronged woman, the grandmother who had come to reclaim what was hers. I chose the gray suit I'd planned, but I added the pearl brooch my mother had given me when I graduated from university. It was simple but distinguished, the kind of jewelry that suggested respectability and tradition. I also took my most formal black leather handbag, the one I'd used for important board meetings. Inside the bag, I placed copies of all the documents. The court order, the handwriting analysis, the photos from Nikki's recital, my bank statements. If anyone questioned my story, I would have immediate proof. Roz came over that evening to go over the plans one last time. "Are you nervous?" she asked as we drank tea in my kitchen. Surprisingly, no, I said, and it was the truth. I feel clear, like when I used to find a major error in a company's books and could finally explain why the numbers didn't add up. "And afterwards? When all this is over, what are you going to do?" It was a good question. For weeks, I had been so focused on stopping the fraud that I hadn't thought much about what would come next. "I don't know," I admitted. "I suppose it depends on what Celeste decides to do. If she accepts responsibility, if she shows any real remorse, maybe we can find a way to rebuild something. And if she doesn't, then I'll have learned something important about my daughter that I should have learned years ago." Roz nodded. "You know what I admire most about you in all this, Yvonne? You're not doing this for revenge. You're doing it for self-respect." She was right. For years, I had mistaken motherly love for enabling destructive behavior. I had thought protecting Celeste from consequences was loving her. But real love, I was beginning to understand, sometimes required letting people face the truth of their actions. Saturday dawned bright and beautiful, the kind of perfect late autumn day that makes everything seem possible. I rose early, had a calm breakfast, and spent the morning in my garden. I found something soothing in the physical work of pulling weeds and deadheading roses. There was an honesty to it, something real and tangible that stood in stark contrast to the lies and manipulations I had been unraveling. At 6 o'clock, while Celeste was likely putting the final touches on her party, I was sitting in my car a few streets away from Kingfisher Lane, waiting for Andrew's call. My phone rang at exactly 7:25. "We're in position, Mrs. Hargrave. Are you ready?" "I'm ready." "Then we'll see you in 5 minutes." "And Mrs. Hargrave? Remember, you have done nothing wrong. You are the victim here, and you are here to reclaim what is yours." That I drove slowly towards Kingfisher Lane. The house was brilliantly lit, with elegant cars filling the circular drive and lining the street. I could hear music and laughter from inside. Through the large windows, I could see figures moving, champagne flutes glinting under chandelier lights. It was exactly the scene Celeste had dreamed of. Success, status, admiration. All of it built on a lie she had told using my name. I saw Andrew's car park at the end of the road, followed by an official-looking county vehicle. It was time. I got out of my Honda, adjusted my handbag on my shoulder, and walked towards the front door of the house that was, technically, mine. With every step, I felt the last vestiges of the woman who avoided. I walked up the gravel path with measured steps, each one firmer than the last. Through the expansive windows, I could see the party in full swing. Elegant women in cocktail dresses, men in expensive suits, waiters circulating with trays of champagne. It was exactly the kind of event Celeste had fantasized about for years, the kind of life she had always believed she deserved. The heavy oak front door was ajar, the sound of animated conversation and jazz music filtering out into the cool night air. I paused on the threshold for a moment, observing the scene unfolding in what was, technically, my living room. Celeste was at the center of the room, radiant in a white dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. She held a champagne flute in one hand and gestured animatedly with the other, clearly recounting some story that had her audience captivated. Trevor, looking every bit the successful estate agent he pretended to be in his sharp navy suit, stood beside her, beaming. And my mother always said that family has to support each other, Celeste was saying, just as I moved close enough to hear. Thankfully, she was able to help us make this dream a reality. It's incredible to have that kind of generational support, isn't it? Several people nodded and murmured their agreement. A woman with a diamond necklace that likely cost more than my car commented, "What a blessing to have such a generous mother." That was my cue. I rang the doorbell. The chime cut through the music and conversation. I saw Celeste turn towards the door with a look of mild irritation, probably expecting a latecomer. Trevor opened the door, and his expression shifted from cordial surprise to absolute shock in a matter of seconds. "Yvonne? How did you get here?" "Hello, Trevor," I said, my voice calm. "It's a lovely party. I hope you don't mind that I invited myself." Behind him, I saw the exact moment Celeste spotted me. Her face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Confusion, recognition, panic, and finally, a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, approaching quickly. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming." "You didn't invite me," I said, keeping my voice just loud enough for several nearby guests to hear. "But considering this is technically my house, I thought I should be here." An awkward silence spread through the part of the room that could hear us. I saw heads turning, conversations pausing. Celeste noticed it too, and her smile became more strained. "Mom, perhaps we could talk in private. I don't know, I think this is perfect," I said, stepping fully into the house. "After all, you've been telling everyone about my generous support for this beautiful property. I thought it would be good to clarify exactly what kind of support I provided." It was then that Trevor saw, through the window, what I knew was coming. Andrew's car and the official county vehicle pulling into the drive. "Celeste," he whispered urgently, "there are police outside." But it was too late. Andrew appeared in the doorway, dressed in a formal suit but carrying an official-looking folder. Behind him came a uniformed man with a badge that clearly identified him as a court bailiff. "Excuse the interruption," Andrew said loudly, his voice cutting through the growing murmur of confusion. "I am Andrew Collins, a financial fraud investigator. Is a Mrs. Celeste Wilson present?" The music stopped abruptly. All conversation ceased. It was as if someone had pressed pause on a film. "I'm Celeste Wilson," my daughter said, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Wilson," Andrew said, unfolding a document, "I have here a court order issued by the county court. This property has been frozen pending an investigation into mortgage fraud and identity theft." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like water breaking through a dam, the voices came. "Fraud? What's going on? Identity theft?" Andrew continued, his professional voice slicing through the chaos. "According to our investigation, Mrs. Celeste Wilson forged the signature of her mother, Yvonne Hargrave, to obtain a mortgage of £950,000 for this property. Mrs. Hargrave never authorized this transaction and had no knowledge of it until she was contacted by the bank regarding delinquent payments. I saw Nikki in a corner of the room, her eyes wide and filled with tears. She looked small and lost among all the well-dressed adults who were now staring at her parents with a mixture of shock and what I could only describe as fascinated horror. That's ridiculous. Trevor shouted, his professional composure finally cracking. This is our house. We live here. We have the papers. Yes, you have papers, I said, finally speaking up, papers that my daughter forged using my personal information. I reached into my handbag and extracted the folder I had prepared. I have here copies of the original documents, a handwriting analysis proving the signature was forged, and proof that I was at my granddaughter's school concert the day I supposedly signed these documents in Bristol. One of the guests, an older man I recognized from Trevor's LinkedIn photos as one of his real estate colleagues, stepped forward. Trevor, is this true? Did you use your mother-in-law's identity to get financing? No. Trevor looked desperate now. This is some kind of misunderstanding. Celeste told me her mother had agreed to help. You told me. Celeste's voice rose an octave. You were the one who suggested using her information. You said she'd never find out. And there it was, the truth finally tumbling out, not in a moment of honesty, but in panic and mutual self-destruction. The court bailiff stepped forward. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, I need you to understand that this property is now under judicial control. You cannot sell it, refinance it, or make any significant alterations until this case is resolved. What does that mean? Asked a woman wearing a name tag that read, Sarah Chun, Albion Financial. My heart gave a little leap. A representative from the bank was here at the party. Trevor had probably invited her to impress his professional contacts. The irony was delicious. It means, Ms. Chun, I said, turning to her, that the loan your bank approved based on falsified information is now in dispute. My daughter used my identity without my knowledge or consent. Sarah Chun looked pale. You're Yvonne Hargrave? The Yvonne Hargrave from the mortgage documents. I am, and I never signed those documents. I never applied for that loan. And I certainly never authorized my daughter to ruin my credit to finance this fantasy. I gestured around the elegant room, at the well-dressed guests, at the entire pantomime of success they had built on my stolen identity. This has to be a mistake, Celeste said, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. Mom, you know I would never do something like this. Really, Celeste? In front of all these people, you're going to keep lying? I walked to the center of the room, to where she had been telling her stories of my generous support. The guests parted to make way for me, as if I were either contagious or perhaps the only honest person in the room. A week ago, I received a call from the bank asking about a delinquent mortgage for nearly £1 million. A mortgage I never applied for a house I had never seen, signed with a forged version of my signature. I pulled the copies of the documents from my bag. Here is the proof. The forensic handwriting analysis shows my signature was forged. Here are my bank statements proving I have never had the income declared on the application. And here, I pulled out the photo of Nikki at her recital, is the proof that I was an hour and a half away from the bank on the day I supposedly signed these documents. Nikki slowly approached, her eyes fixed on the photo. That's from my spring concert, she whispered. Gran, you were there. Of course I was there, my love. I would never miss one of your concerts. But, Mom said you couldn't come because you had to be at the bank. And there it was, the moment even Nikki realized the depth of her mother's lies. Celeste looked desperate now, looking around the room full of friends and colleagues who were watching her with a mixture of horror and fascination. This is ridiculous. She's my mother. Why would I do this if it wasn't just some misunderstanding? Because I am not just your mother anymore. Celeste, I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years. I am the victim of a crime that you committed. Andrew stepped forward with more documents. Mrs. Wilson, I also have here a summons for you to appear in court. The charges include mortgage fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Your husband will also be receiving a summons as a co-applicant on the fraudulent loan. It was then that Trevor finally lost his composure completely. This is insane. You can't ruin our lives over something like this. It's just money. It's family. Exactly, I said, turning to him. It is family. And families don't steal from each other. I looked around the room at all the guests who had come to celebrate Celeste and Trevor's success. Now they knew the truth. The generous mother who had helped make this beautiful house possible was actually the victim of her hosts. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said, walking towards the door. "Though I'm afraid this will be the last party held in this house for some time." I stopped at the threshold and turned back to Nikki, who looked lost and confused in the middle of the chaos. "Nikki, my love, if you ever need to talk to someone who will tell you the truth,